Today on Market Journal, after the floods, some farmers are up to their ears. If your field is overrun with loose cornstalks, we'll give you some ways to manage the problem. Continued trade disputes with China may result in what our analyst calls a soybean nightmare. We'll break down what that could look like. And farm machinery is a big responsibility. If your youngster wants to drive it, they'll need the proper training. Hear how to get it. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Good to see you again this week. We've got another jam-packed show, and we'll begin the show as we have for the last several weeks with a story about the impacts of the floods. And since February's bomb cyclone and subsequent flooding, many producers have dealt with sediment deposited in fields, erosion issues, and even an excess of loose corn stalks that have been left behind by the receding waters. Market Journal's Bill Dodd recently spoke with Nebraska Extension educator John Wilson about the best methods of clearing the debris.
In 2011, eastern parts of the state saw similar flooding, much like we witnessed with February's disastrous bomb cyclone. With that disaster came valuable lessons to learn.
So that was probably our number one question in this area, was what to do with corn stalks.
Nebraska Extension educator John Wilson is no stranger to damaged fields. In the summer of 2011, John was in this exact field trying to figure out how to make the best of a bad situation after extensive flooding caused sediment deposit, erosion, and heaps of washed-up corn stalks. The lessons learned from that flood helped shape the advice John has for victims of this year's devastating bomb cyclone. Namely, what to do with all these corn stalks.
First thing that the farmer needs to do is determine how deep a layer he has out there. That we had areas that had anywhere from a couple inches to 3 feet or more in depth of corn stalks, and we're going to have to handle those differently. If we have shallow accumulations of corn stalks, we can incorporate those with normal tillage, and that will add some organic matter back in the soil. Now, one thing we need to think about when we're adding stalks to the field, if we're incorporating those either now or if we're spreading them this fall and adding more organic matter to the soil, anytime we add corn stalks, that those are high in carbon but low in nitrogen. So if people are incorporating a lot of stalks, especially this spring, that they may need to think about that they may need to add a little extra nitrogen above and beyond what they normally would.
If you do feel there are too many stalks to redistribute into the soil, there are other options producers can enlist into their cleanup efforts as well.
We can move them off of the field, stockpile them in the corner of a field, and either compost them or just, which requires turning during the year to aid in the composting process, or we can just pile them there with the plan of spreading those on the field after harvest this fall. The other thing that corn stalks will do is that they do help protect the soil. Having some residue cover on the soil can reduce the amount of wind and water erosion. So the organic matter, if it's left on the surface, if it isn't all incorporated, can help reduce erosion in flooded fields.
If all else fails, burning the excess stalks may be the best option for you.
There were a lot of corn stalks that were burned this year, that if we have too deep a layer, the top will be dry, but you get down 6 inches or so, and between the sediment in there and the corn stalks will still be moist. They won't have dried out. That we've had farmers that have burned the same pile of corn stalks several times. They'll burn off what's dry, let it go for 10 days, 2 weeks, depending on the weather, and dry out another layer, burn it again, and gradually work through that layer of stalks.
While cleanup may seem like a daunting task, these practices could make a very big difference in when you are able to get your fields producing again. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. Unfortunately, there isn't a one-size-fits-all option for dealing with corn stalks that have accumulated because of the March flooding. What you'll need to do is assess the amount of corn stalks and available equipment to determine which option will work best for you. Moving on, and there has been some increase in acreage nationally for dry peas this year, but at the same time there's also some concern over export pace for both Canada and the U.S. North Dakota State University Extension's Dr. Frayne Olson joined me to take a closer look at what's affecting the dry pea market.
Well, so there's some short-term issues and some longer-term issues. Short-term, there's been some concerns about our ability in the U.S. as well as in Canada, which produce a lot of dry peas as well, for our export pace. We use them both domestically as well as exporting to the international market. India is one of the large buyers globally of pulses in general, but specifically the field peas or dry peas out of the U.S. and Canada. So right now they have a tariff, a 50% tariff on the import of pulse products into India, and that's been putting a short-term damper on the pea market. Although there's expectations that will start to be reduced over time. And then we look longer term, if we look over the next 2 or 3 years, the demand base for protein, vegetable protein in particular, is growing both domestically and internationally. So when I talk about the potential for the pea market, that's really what I'm talking about. It's kind of these longer developments that farmers need to be looking at, and maybe there's some opportunities depending upon their growing region and then the current crop mix that they have.
So when we're talking about growing, what's the best climate for dry peas?
Well, so dry pea is a cool season legume. So soybean is a warm season legume, typically likes warmer temperatures, lots of moisture. The dry pea is a little bit different. It's a legume, but it prefers kind of drier climate and a little bit cooler climate. So again, parts of the western growing regions in Nebraska, as we get into western parts of North Dakota as well, that's kind of the preferred growing region. If you have too high a water levels, then all of a sudden there's some disease issues that start to occur. But again, it's a cool season legume, so there are certain regions that it really works very well.
And what are some of the best uses for dry peas? I know I've read animal feed, lots of protein. What do you think?
Yeah, so the two characteristics that people are really after is that it has high protein levels. It also has high digestible fiber, which again in the human diets is very desirable, but also is desirable within livestock or animal diets. And so domestically, the three big uses would be animal feed, primarily in the beef area, as a supplement for a protein. The other areas would be in pet food. The pet food market has realized that the higher protein levels are also desirable for both dog food as well as cat food. And of course then human consumption. And it's the human consumption part that has the highest value, but also has the highest demand for quality and quality specifications. And of those three different markets, the pet food market and the human food market are the ones that seem to be growing the largest and the most rapidly.
And how's acreage looking for 2019? We seeing increases in that?
We're seeing a slight increase in acreage nationally, at least based on the Prospective Plantings report. We're looking at a slight cutback here in North Dakota, but an increase in Nebraska, and an increase in particular in Montana. And part of that, of course, is because of the different cropping mixes that are available as you get into these different growing regions. So total acreage is expected to be up slightly, but I do know, again, longer term, as I talk to some of the people in the industry, in particular those that are interested in the human food side, they are looking to try and contract some more acres because they want specific varieties with specific characteristics.
And what do you see as the drawbacks for dry peas that farmers would need to look at?
Okay, so right now it is a specialty crop. It's a very small market crop, which means there are typically not a lot of farmers that grow it. There's not a lot of processors or buyers, end users that will be using this. And there isn't a lot of trade, so it gets to be kind of a thin market. It's very difficult to good market information about what's happening unless you're one of those buyers or sellers. You're actively engaged in the marketplace. And a lot of it is grown under contract. So rather than the spot market, which we're comfortable with for wheat and for corn and for soy or soybeans, this is really a contracted crop at this stage because of the smaller volumes. So you got to be very careful about who you're doing business with, about trying to get good market information about what's happening, and be very cautious about having some alternative markets in place if your primary buyer starts to decrease their purchases. So again, if you've contracted with a particular company, what happens to the excess production? What happens to the stuff that's not been contracted? How is that priced where you need to be delivering it? So there are some issues that farmers need to be cautious of and need to be aware of before they start growing these specialty crops.
One more note, harvest management is especially important if you want to get high-quality field peas to be marketed as seed or food for the buying public and receive a premium price for the crop. Time now for trivia this week, and see if you know the answer to this one. How many different breeds of sheep are there in the U.S.? Is it 34, 47, 55, or is it 79? Make your selection, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. Switching gears from sheep to markets now, and as 2019 planting continues, many are still wondering what will happen with some of what's left over from 2018 harvest. Trade issues have made moving the crop rather difficult, and on Tuesday, I was joined by Todd Hultman, a lead analyst for DTN in Omaha. We began our discussion by getting a trade update on where things currently stand with China.
As of this moment, and I'm speaking to you on Tuesday, so I do need to refer to that, trade talks with China have ceased. The last-ditch efforts on Friday ended with no agreement, and there are no scheduled or official trade talks set up as far as we know at the time being. There is talk that President Trump will meet with China's leader, possibly at the end of June at the G20 meeting in Japan. But for right now, those trade talks have stalled.
I read a new piece you've written for DTN called A Soybean Nightmare Revisited, and I encourage anyone who's watching to check that out if you haven't done so already. But in this article, you're saying if these trade issues don't get resolved, then we could see a new record high level of ending soybean stocks. And the USDA estimate is reflecting that too. Could you break that down for us?
Yes. So when I first started talking about the possibility of a bearish nightmare for soybeans, it was last winter when I was speaking to different farm groups around the country, and it became fairly evident that without China's full participation of export business, our ending supplies of soybeans were growing rapidly. And even at that time, they were looking at an ending stocks estimate of around 900 million bushels. Well, now on Friday, that got bumped up to 995, and really the export pace is not even justifying that yet. It may be over 1 billion bushels by the time we get to the end of this season. The hope that has been holding up soybean prices until about April was that a trade agreement would come through and perhaps China would start picking up their buying or even celebrate an agreement with some purchases that would help out this big surplus. But obviously things have gone sour on the trade talks, and so without that hope, this market is really in danger of collapsing even further than it has today.
Yeah, and also from that article, Todd, you say a strategy you might want to consider is a put option. Can you give us a reminder of what that is and why that might be something to think about with soybeans?
Yes, absolutely. And again, I'm sorry to say, but it was a much better strategy in the winter. But basically buying what I call an inexpensive put option is a way of buying disaster insurance when it comes to soybean prices. It allows you to set a bottom selling price where you can cap off your risk. So for instance, this winter, a person could have bought a November soybean 760 soybean put for roughly 4 cents a bushel. Now, the good news about buying a put option is your only risk is the price of the option. You can't lose any more than the 4 cents you pay. It caps your risk to the downside. And of course, 760 was not a great price to contemplate, but at least it gave us some kind of floor to look forward to shut off the pain.
And when it comes to that trade issue with China, what's the biggest thing you'll be tracking in the coming weeks and months?
Well, you know, the thing I've noticed, Troy, is that the real stickler point that keeps getting talked about is intellectual property rights. And as long as negotiations have been going on, there really has not been any significant concession mentioned on that point. And until we get some kind of movement or solution to that, it's hard to imagine that the rest of an agreement could come together. I really don't think there's much resistance on China's part as far as agreeing to buy more U.S. goods. That's somewhat in their self-interest, and they've expressed a willingness to do that in the past. But this intellectual property right sort of thing seems to be one of the main impediments to getting a deal done.
And I want to talk about the WASDE report for May that just came out. Corn looking rather bearish. Does it seem to you that trade uncertainty with Japan, Mexico, Canada, even China to a lesser extent, is that playing a role there?
Yes, I think the breakdown in talks with China definitely has a psychological impact on what we expect from the rest of the trade agreements. And as you mentioned, we've got negotiations going on with Japan right now, Japan and Mexico being two big U.S. customers of ag, corn included. And so when the China deal goes south, it makes you wonder, you know, how well is the talks going to go with Japan? And that just adds to investors' concerns and just the bearish weight of prices that we're seeing.
And Todd, what about wheat? You think that's just a result of too much supply?
Well, yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, even though we've got the lowest planting in over 100 years for our winter wheat acres, we're still going to have plenty of wheat of U.S. supplies available, it looks like, because we're going to carry probably 1.1 billion bushels of old crop wheat into this new season. We're going to grow, at least the current production estimate is for less than 2 billion bushels. But the real tough hurdle for wheat is that around the world, so far, all the major wheat regions are doing well in terms of weather. Their crops look good, and USDA is projecting a 6% increase in world wheat production. So that's very tough to come up against.
And finally, as we let you go, Todd, any other risk management advice or marketing tips that you'd like to mention to us?
Well, stay close. A lot of the best planning really happens in the winter, and some of our best pricing opportunities happen in the winter. I would say one tip is that we like to watch seasonals a lot, and typically corn and soybeans both are coming near the time of year when they typically make their seasonal highs. Well, we understand that that's tough for soybeans to do in this fundamental atmosphere, but corn still has a chance. It may be a later seasonal high than normal, but there is still a chance of a better corn price this year because we've got so many planning difficulties that we're still facing.
Thanks again to Todd for helping us to make sense of this quickly changing story. And we've also posted his DTN article that was mentioned on the Market Journal Facebook page. Next week, our analyst will be Luke Beckman from Central Valley Ag. Next up, and the toll from this spring's major flood event has been high. Homes flooded, grain storage facilities destroyed, livestock lost, and roads and highways washed away. Then there's sand and sediment, and the road to recovery is still a long one. But the question is, where do you start? Well, in the May, Nebraska farmer, read about taking the initial steps in recovering flood-damaged fields. That includes dealing with sand and silt deposition and getting the ground covered to prevent more erosion. It's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, much of the state has had a chance to dry out with lots of sun and some pretty warm temperatures. So the question is, will the trend continue into next week?
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. It's been a couple of weeks since we've been on the air due to my vacation in Michigan, and during that time period, of course, we've seen some very cool conditions during the previous week, and of course, the tornado touchdown in the southwestern part of Lincoln, and then we've had some very warm temperatures this week that has helped us at least get some of the planting done. Progress is still behind normal as of Sunday, 45% pleated on the corn. I suspect we'll see that number jump dramatically as we go to next Monday. But further to the east, the inclement weather has kept planting at a bare minimum. Many of the states, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, are anywhere from 40 to 60% behind their normal planting pace, with another major storm system ready to poised to enter into the central United States to continue giving significant moisture to much of the region. So as we look at the upper air models, today we have this trough that has ejected out of the trough in the western United States. We've seen some precipitation breaking out across northern Nebraska last night. This trough will help to keep precipitation in our region as we see the surface low in south central Kansas start to slowly migrate its way toward the western Great Lakes. So the thunderstorm activity from last night looks to be heaviest across northeast and south central Nebraska and also in southeastern Nebraska. We will see that generate more in the afternoon, and then tomorrow we'll start to see another piece of energy moving into the region. The main low moves out toward Michigan, another low in the Texas Panhandle. That will help to generate some thunderstorms, particularly across eastern Nebraska, with the heaviest of them in northwestern Iowa. And then on Monday, we see that trough starting to dig in rather significantly, starting to eject energy up into our region with a surface low developing over the Texas Panhandle. That will bring a big fetch of moisture into our region, and we start to see thunderstorms fill in as the day progresses, getting heavy as we go through the overnight hours of Monday. And that energy still continues out of that trough, directing toward southeastern and eastern Kansas, with the surface low now making its way into south central portions of Nebraska. That is going to have widespread thunderstorms across the western half of the state during the first half of the day. That will progress toward eastern Nebraska during the overnight hours. And then we see the last pulse of energy starting to move out into our region as we go into Wednesday. Still have another surface low in Texas Panhandle that will move toward the northeast, and that will actually bring the main low pressure system with it. So it looks like we will see some thunderstorm activity in the southeast and the northwest, with maybe a dry slot in the center part of the state. And then on Thursday, we start to see that trough trying to make progress toward the east. A surface low, another one looks like it's in the Texas Panhandle. This one looks like it's going to direct the energy more towards southeastern Nebraska and points off to the east, leaving much of northern Nebraska high and dry. On Friday, we see another trough trying to build into the western United States. Surface lows are lined up along the front range of the Rocky Mountains, but we don't have the moisture evection from the Gulf to really influence significant moisture north of Nebraska. It looks like primarily it's going to be south central Nebraska and points to the east that will deal with the heavier precipitation before we see a slight drying trend into the future. So if we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, with that extra low coming in, it looks like below normal temperatures are going to be widespread across the central Rockies, warmer across the southeast in terms of precipitation. With that big storm kicking out, another significant round of precipitation is likely as we go through the following week.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked, how many different breeds of sheep are there in the U.S.? The answer is B, 47. Closer to home, the Nebraska Sheep and Goat Producers Association supports the state's sheep and goat industries. All total, there are about 1,600 sheep and goat producers here. Hey, not bad. For our final story today, it's never too early to get in some work experience. However, it is unlawful for someone under 16 to use certain equipment on a farm unless parents or legal guardians own the farm. But on the bright side, anyone ages 14 and 15 can receive certification through a course provided by Nebraska Extension to operate certain machinery. Dr. Aaron Yoder of the University of Nebraska Medical Center joined us to discuss the importance of Nebraska Extension's upcoming tractor safety course.
The courses are a cooperative effort between the Medical Center and Nebraska Extension. So we have some extension educators that help us organize them. Some of the expertise comes out of our Medical Center in Omaha and our Ag Safety Center there. So we collaborate on this and get all around the state, normally 10 to 12 courses the whole way from Scottsbluff back to the eastern Nebraska areas. We are aiming these at 14 and 15-year-olds, so younger people that are starting into their farming occupations, trying to instill some good safety habits before they get there. meet some national requirements that are out there for that. But we also have some adults that are returning to farming or that are second career farmers or something like that that participate in the courses.
What are some things that are going to be covered in the courses?
Right, so tractor and machinery safety is one of the largest parts of it. We do cover some general agricultural safety and hazards like grain bins, other vehicles like ATVs and that sort. It focuses on, and the requirements we're trying to meet, focus on tractor and machinery safety. So a lot of it is focused around that, which is one of the leading causes of injuries anyway.
Yeah, could you talk about why training like this is needed? I know there's some federal law exemptions that come into play here.
Right, so it's a regulation that often isn't enforced unless something bad happens. But the U.S. Department of Labor has a regulation that anyone under the age of 16 down to 14 and 15-year-olds can work on other people's farms for hire other than their parents if they have this training exemption that allows them to be exempt from that law at a younger age.
And it seems to me what's really great about this, because it seems like it's more than just learning about farm safety and operating equipment safely. It's really about instilling that respect for agriculture and that respect for safety at a really young age.
Sure. I see it as developing careers for these younger people that maybe weren't considering agriculture, were considering a different career, getting them excited about agriculture again, as well as, like you said, instilling those safety mindsets so that I don't like the statement safety first, because then we wouldn't do anything if we were safe, but making it equal to everything else we think about, getting a job done, that sort of thing, thinking about the safety just for a few seconds before we do a task.
And we hear about farming accidents all the time, but I found it interesting that tractor and ATV accidents are the most common ag-related deaths in the state, right?
In the state, in the country, and probably around the world, any place that has mechanized agriculture. Tractors have roll bars on them. Tractor rollovers are the leading cause when we look at specific types of tractor injuries. And there's still a lot of tractors out there across the state that don't have the roll bars on them. So getting those type of equipment on there, making sure people are using them, not putting extra people on the tractors, and using them wisely when we do. A lot of people, especially my colleagues around the country, say, well, Nebraska's flat, how do you roll a tractor over? Right. But we do lots of maintenance, mowing ditches, pulling stumps out, pulling stuck cars this time of the year that can lead to tractor rollovers.
As Aaron mentioned, the course is for those ages 14 and 15. Anyone older that would still like to attend is allowed, but anyone younger than 14 won't be eligible for the course. For more information, go online to kearney.unl.edu and click on the Tractor Safety banner. Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. Next week, we'll look at the benefits of winter wheat as a forage or as a grain. And if you or someone you know would be a good candidate for the Nebraska LEAD program, hear what it takes to apply. All that and a whole lot more. Hope to see you right back here next time. Until then, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.